All right. Hi, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today? Today we have our artist of the week. This week we're talking about American comic book artist Darryl Banks. And got a picture of him right here. We're going to go ahead and go in here, get Mr. G out of the way. So there's Darryl there. And he is with his best friend, Green Lantern, who has made him some decent living here over the past few decades here. So Mr. Banks, I found a synopsis. He is going to be at a comic book convention here coming up in 2021, and it's a pretty good synopsis they have here of his career. So I'm just going to read this off here. Darryl Banks is from Columbus, Ohio. He graduated from Columbus College of Art and Design, and I actually met him when he was teaching at Columbus College of Art and Design. He was teaching a comic book illustration class. So this is where I kind of got into comic book illustration, was from this guy right here. He began his career in comics in 1989, working for various independent comic companies. He started with a small company called Millennium Publishing. He worked on smaller titles such as Doc Savage, Man of Bronze, and if you ever heard of the Wild Wild West, that was converted into a comic book series, and Just Machine. In 1993, he started working with DC Comics, made a name for himself on Legion of Superheroes, and later got to work on Green Lantern. He was the creator of the Kyle Rayner series of Green Lantern, Parallax, and other characters. If you're a big comic book nerd like Mr. G, that means something. If not, what that means, he started some really big story arcs for the Green Lantern series. But he worked for various other companies and characters. He included work with Marvel and DC. He worked on Captain America, X-Men, Tomb Raider, Epiphany from Top Cow, G.I. Joe Reloaded, Devil's Due Publishing, covers, Moonstar, Phantom series. Currently, Darryl is working with Harkins Raiders from a Kickstarter project with Ominous Press, which is an independent contractor out of Columbus, Ohio. Comic publisher out of Columbus, Ohio. Excuse me. He does a lot of comic book concept art and works for some toy companies nowadays. But let's look at some of Mr. Banks' works here. Okay. All right. So if I go over here, so I'm just going to go to DC here. So first of all, so like he started in the 90s, and you guys, like I said, I've been a huge comic book nerd for years. And when I say a comic book nerd, I don't mean like I've seen all the Avengers and all 19 of the Marvel movies. I mean like actual paper comic books like these, okay, that you used to get from the store. And those comic book stores are still around, but you see fewer and fewer of them as media changes. But all of the stories for all those movies that you guys love to consume all come from those paper comic books that have been around for decades. And some of the stories I'm reading are stories that have been around. You know, Bruce Wayne has been dying in Lonely Alley for, decades. So that's not a new story. So they keep retelling the same stories. So if I go over here on DC, you can go to talent, and I got Darryl Banks here, and he is what's known as a penciler. Okay, and each one of these guys here, so there's his name, but he is listed as a penciler, colorist, an artist, and a cover artist. Okay, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But primarily, he is a penciler. So if you go here, you can see a whole bunch of different books that he has worked on. Mostly on here, they're just showing you the covers. So there's some stuff on there, and you can see some other stuff. You can click on here, and there's some links here that see the stuff that he's worked on. Primarily, like you said, for DC, he's really known for this work with Green Lantern. He worked with him for about a decade, and with Justice League before that. Okay, so there is some big stuff with DC if you want to see some of that. Now, over here, it's kind of hard to find some of his just pencil work, okay? And because when you work for a big company like DC or Marvel, you sign this big copyright non-disclosure agreement about selling your art and promoting your art with their images, okay? So, you don't own Green Lantern, you don't own Superman, you don't own Wonder Woman, but you're drawing pictures. So it's kind of like you're working for them, so you get paid to do that, and you kind of have to skirt a few rules in order to promote yourself. Mainly that is done through comic book conventions. So usually I would see, before I had kids, I would see Darryl at the comic book conventions when I would go around and see him. If you've never been to a comic book convention, I highly advocate it. It's a spectacular time. It's all kinds of media and entertainment nowadays. It's not just comic books, it's comic movies, it's video games, and all kinds of. So you've never been to one, they're spectacular. Even like a small local one here in Dayton or Columbus is spectacular to go to. So here on Darryl's comicartfans.com, you can see some of the stuff. Right here is just a gallery, and we've got some images here. You can click on them. And this is really his part of the deal, where he does just the line art, and then a colorist would come in, and nowadays it's all digital, would come in, scan this into a computer, and do the digital work on there. And even more so, find a pencil here. This is really more of what he does. He just does the pencils. Okay. Then somebody would come behind this and ink this all in so I don't see any of the strokes. And he's really kind of made a name himself doing this kind of classic comic book character of what you think of, when you think of comic book characters, people in spandex outfits flying around in space. Don't know where that one, there it is. Like I said, spandex outfits flying around space, really heavy chiaroscuro, very heavy dramatic darks and lights in there. And that's kind of what he's known for, okay? Like I said, he kind of made a name for himself and was able to do covers. Not all comic book artists get to do the covers. You kind of start with splash pages. When I say a splash page, I pull this up. So when you go into a comic book, see if I can pull this up here, you kind of got your regular pages that have all the art with the little blocks like you think, and then they have the splash page here. That's the big picture of Batman and Robin jumping out of the sky. Okay, you get paid more for splash pages, these big images, okay, because they'll recreate those images and they'll use those in multiple publications. They'll make posters from it, they'll make advertise from it. Sometimes they go on to be the covers, and once you get enough of those under your belt, then sometimes you can go on to be the cover artist. The cover artists make a lot more money than the artists who are inside of the book drawing. Okay, oftentimes when you see a comic book, the guy on the front or girl on the front who's drawing the front cover is somebody who is completely different who is drawing the inside cover, and that's often the case because like I said, the artist on the cover makes a lot more money, has a lot more experience usually, and has a contract to exclusively work with Marvel, DC, Image, Top Cow, whatever comic book company you're working with. So enough me talking, let's show some more images here. So down here is a good place to look for some of his images here. I mentioned conventions. So if you go to conventions, like people, so he would sit at a booth just like he's got right here. And once that pulls up, so he would have a booth, and they have a lot of comic book artists do this where they sit and they sell their works. So if you're a comic book artist, you come up and you end up with these stacks and stacks and stacks of comic book boards that you can't do anything with. Okay, so if you go to a convention, fans will buy them from you. So a lot of these comic book illustrators will go to these conventions and sell these boards. So if you're a fan of Green Lantern and you want to get a 1990s era Green Lantern signed by Darryl Banks and keep that as a collector's item, that's where you would go to get such a thing. Okay. Here are some of his convention sketches. So these again are just sketches where he is drawing these things. People are coming up and commission him, hey, can you do me a picture of Krona, whoever that guy is, don't know that character, or any other character. If you want a picture of the Huntress, he'll do a picture of the Huntress for you. Okay, and then you pay him to do those. Okay, so that's one alternative form of income for a comic book artist. See here, in published artworks here, down here I can kind of show you, this would be literally what as an industry person in the comic book industry would do. So when he was working for DC, and he still does occasional work for him, it mostly just covers, this is what it would look like. And you can see up here, it's literally a board, and most of the comic book artists still work in traditional forms where they're drawing pencil on paper. You see up here, the artist is Darryl Banks. Terry Austin is the author of the script. And there's the book, when it was made. And it's on this paper that has these lines. These are called blue line papers. So when they print those won't be printed. You'll also see all these little marks in here. He's got little notes in here, and he's got like little X's. The little X's indicate to the inker who will become he'll be passing this off to after he gets past the art director who says, okay, that's good to go. Let's get it to the inker. Those little X's indicate to the inker that will be a solid black area. So that's what those mean there. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of images for you to peruse. On the assignment, there's also his Twitter feed, and there is an Instagram feed if you want to explore that further. He also has a book currently out where he is working on that Harker's Raiders. That's the graphic novel he is working on there. And he also has a book of his art out with that company as well. Like I said, as far as comic book illustration goes, it's a team of people who do that. So like I said, he is the penciler, so he would do the pencils, and then there's an inker. Then there's a guy who comes in and does all of the lettering when you go in. So when he draws all this stuff, Darryl knows that 30% of this area is going to be covered up with words and like thought bubbles and word bubbles and text boxes. So when you're drawing out your stuff, you kind of have to leave these areas that have action in it, but you don't know how much. So like 30% of it is just extra dead area. Okay. Then it goes to a colorist. Then it goes to a revisionist. Then it goes to the final publisher. And if we need to go in, most of that all is done digital now. Okay. So the only really traditional art done with like pencil and board is done here in the penciling part. Okay. So this week, what are we doing, Mr. G? So this week, I want you to choose one of Banks's works from either the DC Gallery page or from his Comic Art Fans Gallery page and discuss it. Okay. Most of these you can copy the page and put it there. So if you can include the image that you chose and talk about why you chose that particular image and what you found appealing about it. Just that easy. I'm like, wow, that looks really cool. I wish I could draw like that. Or I found, the way he did the blacks and whites on there or whatever. Talk about what you see and what you find appealing about the image. Second, this week, I thought it'd be interesting if you crafted a question about comic book art and the industry. Okay, what would you like to know more about? Like I said, I am a comic book nerd and a comic book fan, and I love and could talk about this stuff all day long. So if you were going to talk and ask a question of somebody in the comic book industry, what would you ask? What don't you understand about anything in that industry? Okay, just to kind of turn it on its head this week. Okay, so do that, do good work, and we'll talk to you soon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.